Ahoy hoy, this is Michaela from Team Retro, where we like retro games and we like the devices that bring them to us. So last week, this device came in out of the rain, and this was a bit of an unexpected purchase for me. I wasn't expecting to buy a device like this, but I had a little bit of cash back, and this device was on sale at a refurbished price. And this device was definitely a return just because of the condition that it came to me. The box was a little bit beat up and the system itself had fingerprints all over it. And it looked like it was kind of poorly treated, but thankfully in good condition. So this is the Anbernic RG552. This is a retro gaming system that is highly praised for its amazing screen, yet highly criticized for its price to performance. And this is a dual boot Android and Linux retro gaming device that is heavily supported by the community, even despite its criticisms. And in the week and a half that I have had it, it has actually become my primary device for playing retro games. So this video is not going to be a review. This is actually going to be a tutorial video teaching you how to get from zero to hero and optimizing both the Android and the Linux side of this device to get the best experience out of your retro games. So let's jump in and let's get to work. So let's take a quick look at the stock operating systems just to show why we want to change and optimize them. The Linux side of the RG552 is actually a fork of Batocera that's been customized for Anbernic's branding and needs. And on the surface, it seems to be pretty straightforward. However, most of the emulators are not configured to look their best. For example, if I boot up a random Neo Geo Pocket game here, it's unusually stretched to fit the full screen, and this does not look great. And unfortunately, this holds true for all of the systems, including PlayStation 1. You could see this fits the whole screen. And we can go into the RetroArch settings and we can change the aspect ratio to 4:3, but even that doesn't look right. It looks very smushed, and that's just because of the resolution that this screen comes with. And so if we were to do a lot of tweaking on this device using the RetroArch settings, we can get a somewhat decent picture, but I really don't see the need to continue futzing with this when there are operating systems out there that have already done the grunt work for us. Now let's go ahead and boot into the Android system, and we simply need to just take the SD card out of that first slot and then power the unit on. And we will be greeted by the Anbernic logo as well as the Android logo while we boot up into Android 11. And this device used to ship with Android 9, so I'm pretty sure mine was updated with its previous owner. But as you could see here, it's a pretty bare bones version of Android, and it's got some odd notifications saying that performance is impacted and to check the bootloader. But Anbernic did throw in a couple of features here. There's an option to change the performance mode, as well as an option to impact how often the fan speed goes off. There's also a key mapping option for any Android games that may require a key mapper. And while there are some preloaded emulators on this side of the device, there is no Google Play Store. So with no Google Play Store means no Google Play services, which means that there are a whole bunch of apps and front ends that we either are not going to be able to use or that we're going to have to sideload. And so I had pretty much seen enough here, so I'm just going to power this down and we're going to go into optimizing this device with some better operating systems. And we're going to start with Black Seraph's build of Android 11. Now, in order to get this build, you will need to support him on Patreon at the $10 a month tier. So because of that, I'm not going to show off the inside of that Patreon page, but I will show you the 5 files that you are going to get when you do download this build of Android. You're also going to get a README file that I strongly suggest you read all 9 steps because you don't want to risk accidentally bricking your device because you didn't pay attention. I also recommend you use a good quality SD card for installing this build. So let's go ahead and start following this guide, and we're going to use 7-zip to extract just the first of these 5 files with the image. And then just go ahead and extract them to your downloads directory, and you'll have that update.img as well as the README file. Now let's go ahead and use Balena Etcher or any other imaging program in order to flash this update image to a micro SD card. So I'm using a 32 gigabyte SanDisk card. So once you've selected your update.img and your micro SD card, you can just go ahead and let this flash, grab a coffee or your beverage of choice, and then come back when it's all done and we can continue on with the next step. Now this was the first time in using Balena Etcher that I actually got a flash failed sign. And so I wiped the SD card and tried again 2 times, and I got the same flash failed sign, but when I went to go continue with this process, it actually didn't seem to fail at all, so I'm not sure why I got this error message. And I've never been more scared to put an SD card in a device, but thankfully everything seemed to have gone as planned. Now, I sped this up really fast because this update is going to take a long time. So you might want to grab a bite to eat or go use the bathroom or something and just kind of leave this for a while because this is going to take long, probably about 20 minutes or so. Then you're going to eventually see a couple of lines of script, and then you are going to get an instruction to remove the SD card. So we're going to do that now. We're going to go ahead and pop out that SD card. And the second you do, everything turns black and boots up into a recovery menu. And we're going to use the volume buttons on the side to scroll down to wipe data / factory reset. And then we're going to use the power button to confirm that choice. And at that point, it's going to ask you if you want to commit. We're going to go ahead and commit, and we're going to sit, and we're going to let our system sit there and act like it's doing nothing, but it's really doing something. So just leave it alone for this time. Don't touch it. And again, this is going to take a very long time. And then finally, once it's done, you can use the power button to just hit reboot system now, and this will reboot us into our new, better Android build. First boot will take slightly longer than all of these subsequent boots, but you will ultimately end up at your standard Google Android setup screen. And I'm just going to go ahead and skip the setup process here and get us over to our home screen. And you could see our home screen is very bare bones. We have a nice thank you from Black Seraph for supporting them. And we also have Chrome and Google Play Store. So let's go ahead and sign into the Google Play Store. And let's go ahead and start downloading some apps. Now again, I'm not going to show this actual process. If you have a smartphone, downloading apps should be pretty straightforward to you. But what I am going to do is actually showcase which apps you should download for the Android side. We're actually going to be using the Android side only for Nintendo 64, Nintendo DS, and PlayStation Portable emulation. And so we're going to set up those 3 emulators in this video. And then I also optionally recommend that you download Reset Collection as a front end. It is a paid app, but I find it to be a very good front end. Now let's go ahead and set up these emulators, and let's start with Drastic. And we're going to make sure we allow certain permissions here, access to recording audio, as well as access to the file system. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to go into change options, and we're going to go into external controller. And what we're going to do is we're going to change our mapping to one of the no mapping options, and then we're just going to go ahead and remap all of our buttons appropriately. And then we're also going to go into map special, and I skip most of these settings, but I do map open menu to L2, and then I also map pointer down to R3 in case I want to use the right stick to navigate the touchscreen as opposed to the touchscreen itself. And then we'll just go ahead and click rename, and I'm just going to name it RG552. And that's all we need to do for Drastic, so now we can move on to the Mupen emulator. Again, we want it to allow access to our file system, and then we're going to go ahead and go into settings, and then profiles, and then controller. And then from there, we're going to click Android Gamepad and select copy. We're going to go ahead and give it a name. I'm also going to name this RG552. And then we're going to go ahead and remap all of our keys as appropriate. And again, I'm going to map L2 to open up the Mupen menu. So in this situation, it's going to be called pause. So we're going to go ahead and map that to L2. And then from there, we're going to go into select profiles, and under controller 1 profile, we're going to change it to RG552. So now our games will all work under that controller profile. Now finally, we're going to go into PPSSPP, and there's not much that we really need to do here. We're just going to go into our settings and controls, and then we're going to set a button to open up the menu. In this case, we're going to turn off the on-screen touch controls, and then we're going to go into control mapping, and we're just going to go ahead and scroll down until we see an option called pause, and we're just going to make sure that that's set to L2. And now here I've set Reset Collection as my default launcher. And so now every time I boot into Android mode, it's going to take me right into this launcher, and from there I can select from DS, PSP, or N64 games. And then if I need to, I can always access my Android apps and settings from this front end as well. Now getting into some testing, here's Kirby Superstar Ultra running on the Android side, and you can see we have full control over dictating what the screen sizes look like as well as what the resolution is. When it comes to Nintendo DS, I will always take the Android version of Drastic if I can get it. Here's a PSP game running at 2x resolution. This is Half Minute Hero, and we're taking all of that screen real estate. And if you've never played Half Minute Hero before, I highly recommend you give this game a shot. It's a bit of a deep cut, but it is actually a really fun game, and you can play it in very short bursts. Now, I did have Nintendo 64 footage, but it seems to have gotten lost, and instead of delaying this video any further, just take my word for it that Nintendo 64 works very well on the Android side. Now let's bounce over to the Linux side, and I'm going to recommend that we use AmberELEC as our custom firmware for Linux. I tried a couple of different Linux-based operating systems, and this was the only one that really gave me the best performance and the fewest bugs. So we're simply going to go to amberelec.org. We're going to go ahead and go to the download section, and we'll download the version for the RG552. And then you can use Raspberry Pi Imager, or you can use Balena Etcher to write this program to your micro SD card, whichever one you feel works best for you. And then all you do to switch to this Linux installation is you're going to put the SD card into slot 1 of the Anbernic 552, and then you're going to put your ROMs in slot 2. And so as you could see here, this is my actual finished build of AmberELEC. So we're going to show you how to get to this build. You could see here I'm using a nice theme, and it booted right into my favorites game list, and you could see all the games here that I've listed as favorites. You have some retro games as well as some native ports. And so the first thing you're going to want to do is go into your settings and your network settings and just make sure that you have Wi-Fi enabled and that you are connected to the internet. The next thing you're going to want to do is go into your scraper. And you want to make sure your database is set to screen scraper, your image source is set to screenshot, box source to box2D, logo source to wheel. And then if you want to scrape videos, you can, but I actually turned that off because I found over the last year and a half of me making these videos that the videos just started getting annoying after a while. And then from there, just make sure you have created an account with screenscraper.fr and you've logged in with it, and then go ahead and scrape your box art. Next step is to go into updates and downloads, and we're going to go into themes. And you could download whatever themes you want, but I actually decided to go with AmberELEC just because this is the theme that I feel works the best. And I also, when I set this theme, set the view layout to grid. And that grid layout is what created this nice minimalistic look that you see here. You're not bogged down by metadata, you just have a logo, a screenshot, and a box art, and that's really all you need. Not to mention the fact that it also looks really nice with this particular theme. So we're going to tweak some game settings next, and these game settings recommendations come straight from Retro Gamecore. So stop by his channel, say thank you, and also subscribe to him when you're there. Let's start by going into game settings. Let's make sure the game aspect ratio is at core provided. Bilinear filtering is set to off, and integer scaling pixel perfect is set to on. Let's also go down and set auto save load to show save states if not empty. And then let's make sure shaders and filters are set to off. Now we can go down to per system advanced configuration, and let's set things up for a few systems individually. Under Game Boy, we're going to set the shader to handheld LCD 3x.GLSLP. And we're going to make sure game aspect ratio is at core provided. Colorization is at special 1. And then under Game Boy Advance and Game Boy Color, we're going to set that exact same shader, handheld LCD 3x.GLSLP. We're going to do that for Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance. Now let's load up a game here, and once the game loads up, we're going to hit select and X in order to get into the RetroArch menu. And once we get there, we're going to go into options. And we're going to scroll down until we get to interframe blending, and we're going to make sure that that's set to LCD ghosting accurate. So now with those options, we have a very authentic looking and gorgeous Game Boy look. And this screen combined with these settings make this an ideal handheld to play Game Boy games on. Now, for those Super Game Boy enhanced games like Kirby's Dream Land 2, you'll notice that if you have a no intro ROM that it'll say SBG enhanced. So for those, let's go ahead and let's actually go into advanced game options and set the emulator to MGBA, because that emulator will automatically detect Super Game Boy enhancements and they will show up as you are playing the game. So now you'll get that unique colorization that was only reserved for taking one of these Game Boy cartridges and plugging it into a Super Game Boy. And honestly, I know I'm always showcasing Kirby's Dream Land 2, but honestly, one of the best Super Game Boy enhanced games was Pokemon Red and Pokemon Blue, and not a lot of people realize that these are Super Game Boy enhanced. They thought it was just regular black and white, but if you play these on the MGBA emulator, you'll get that full color. And honestly, if I could play Pokemon Blue again for the first time, I would be ecstatic, because any other Pokemon game is amazing, but it never quite captured the magic of sitting and looking at this title screen and wondering, what are these creatures? And more importantly, how do I find them? Like, think about it. In 1999, we looked at this title screen and we said, I have no idea what that Pokemon is. While we're on the MGBA core, let's just boot up a Game Boy Advance game really quick, and I think it goes without saying that Game Boy Advance on a 16:9 screen like this just looks absolutely beautiful. Now let's boot up an NES game and go back into the RetroArch menu, and we're going to go into options and then video, and then from there we're going to make sure that mask overscan horizontal is turned on. Then we're going to go into emulation hacks, and then we're also going to make sure that remove sprite limit is also turned on. And so what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that there are no artifacts on the right and left of the screen, but it's also going to smooth out the glitches that would appear on old NES games, because there was a limit to how many sprites could be on screen at the same time before the games got all wonky. Now let's move on to Genesis, where we can go ahead and go back into game settings and then per system advanced configuration and then Genesis, and we can set our emulator to Genesis plus GX wide and set the aspect ratio to core provided. Now let's boot up a game, go back into the RetroArch quick menu and go to options, and then under video, we're going to set the extra columns to draw for widescreen to 2. You can set this between 2 and 8, but I'm going to leave it at 2 for now. We're also going to go into emulation hacks, and we're going to make sure remove per line sprite limit is turned to on. And the results of these tweaks might not be apparent for every single game. Like here in Street Fighter II Champion Edition, it looks really good, but it doesn't quite look widescreen. But then you go into something like Sonic 2, and the widescreen hacks are not only very apparent, but they are beautiful. And this is one of the 2 best ways to play Sonic 2 on this device. We'll get into the other way a little bit later. Now we can optionally go into the emulation options for PCSX Rearmed, and we can go down to GPU plugin, And then from there, we can turn on enhanced resolution and enhanced resolution speed hack. And what that will do was it will give us widescreen for our PlayStation games. However, I found that I didn't really care for this because in this specific example of Symphony of the Night, there are screens in which part of the resolution is cut off. So I ended up turning that off and just switching it back to a regular resolution. And honestly, the way this is set up in AmberELEC, I didn't feel the need to stretch this out to the full screen because it looks great as it is, and the black bars are not really that bad. Now, if you want to boot just into favorites, you're going to go into Game Collection Settings. You're going to go to Start on System and set that to Favorites, and make sure Start on Game List is turned on. And then from there, every time you reboot your system, it's going to boot into every single game that you marked as a favorite, and then you could start playing from there. One final note I want to make here is that you can use Portmaster to install and run native ports on your AmberELEC partition. And this is an absolute great device to play these native ports on. As a matter of fact, this is now the only device that I put ports on out of all of my retro handhelds. Not to say that I don't have these games available on other devices in some way. This is the best way to play these native Linux ports. There are even native ports of Sonic 1 and Sonic 2 that run at a full 60 frames per second and are in full widescreen, as well as the ability to play as Knuckles. And so earlier when I said that the Genesis widescreen emulator was one of the best ways to play Sonic 1 and Sonic 2, this is the absolute best way to play this game because you also have save game support here. And on top of that, you can also play the most recent Ninja Turtles game as a native Linux port. Now, I was going to include a tutorial in this video on how to set up these ports. However, Retro Gamecore yet again did a much better job than I could ever hope to do. And so instead of reinventing the wheel, if you are interested in figuring out how to get these ports running on the 552, I'm going to defer you over to his channel and his website. And I'll include a direct link to the Portmaster section of his guides. But for now, I think that'll do it for this video. If you have an Anbernic RG552 and are interested in getting the best possible emulation experience out of it, hopefully this video guide was able to help you get there. And let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you have one of these devices? Do you enjoy it? Did you pass on it? And why did you pass on it? And if you want to continue the conversation on Discord, Team Retrogue is part of the Steam Machine production, so I'll leave a link in the description on how to join that community. But that'll do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and if this video was helpful to you in any way, please be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, bye for now, and don't stop believing.